And recording.
All right, so we are back again for another episode of the Chabinet. I am the department chair,
And I am the cabinet.
and we have a plethora of articles today, almost to the point where we actually couldn't pick which ones we want to do. So we might go a little overtime today to try to fit everything in. The world doesn't stop turning, does it?
It does
Um,
not.
no, it certainly does not, and there is a lot going on. I know that cabinet. Ironically, we both came today with interesting articles, and we're actually like sort of trading off those articles uh, to talk about today. Uh, cabinet, I know you have something interesting. What was it?
Yeah. We have Cuomo calls the United States Supreme Court's religious gatherings ruling irrelevant. And this is actually one that you brought to my attention, but I was at the same time looking at the actual Supreme Court decision. uh, so we both came at this from slightly different directions. I'll go ahead and start reading this one, and then you can go ahead and read the other article later. I think that's what we'll do. So, Cuomo is the governor of New York. Not New York City, but New York State. New York City has a mayor. Sometimes those two are at odds. But
Mhm.
Cuomo is a very left-leaning governor and appears sometimes centrist only in comparison to New York's mayor. Um, he has issued some of the strictest COVID restrictions, and he's also given himself some of the most broad powers in dealing with the virus. Um, so what he's sort of been at war with the Orthodox Jewish communities in New York,
Yeah.
who believe that they have a religious right to gather and to dress a certain way, and for a while they didn't want to wear masks and things like this. Um, and also, the Roman Catholic Church has banded with them in a legal suit against Cuomo. So SCOTUS came down and said Cuomo can't sort of arbitrarily assign red or orange statuses to these districts based on COVID risk, and then basically say to these institutions, well, because the color has entered this phase, you are now restricted in your gatherings.
Hmm.
Um, all right, so he says that the SCOTUS decision doesn't matter because it was a narrow decision that only covered. Well, let me read the damn thing. All right, so Cuomo on Thursday dismissed as irrelevant U.S. Supreme Court decision blocking coronavirus restrictions imposed on religious gatherings, saying it related to specific areas that were no longer considered at high risk. It's technically true.
Hmm.
The court, 6-3 conservative majority, voted 5-4, because we know it's actually a 5-4 conservative majority. Roberts does not count. On Wednesday, in favor of requests by the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn and two Orthodox Jewish congregations for an injunction to block the restrictions from being enforced. All right. So basically, they're not asking for the law to be overturned. They are, but that's a different process, which is going to take a lot longer. And so they're asking that in the meantime, that their gatherings be allowed to continue until the ruling is given. And usually, this injunction will be delivered if the plaintiffs can demonstrate a likelihood that their case will succeed.
Hmm.
Um, the order marked one of the first consequential actions of the court involving President Donald Trump's new appointee, ACB, who cast a deciding vote in favor of religious groups. Conservative Chief Justice Roberts dissented along with the court's three liberals. Happy Thanksgiving, Trump tweeted. Okay, well, it's not about Trump, but it is. Everything's about Trump because they can.
Hmm.
All right.
They can't help themselves.
The case stemmed from an October 6th decision by Cuomo, a Democrat, to shut down non-essential businesses in targeted areas where infections have spiked, including some neighborhoods in Brooklyn. Okay. The place this gets interesting is which businesses he thinks are essential. Under his
Hmm.
restrictions, houses of worship in, quote, red zones could remain open at 25% capacity up to a maximum of 10 people. Um, it's worth noting that in order for Orthodox Jews to hold a religious service, 10 men must be present. Okay,
uh,
we'll come
and
back to that.
right, and I know that we chose this article first, and ironically, it's the one that I brought up. But again, you were looking at the ruling. There was a video attached with this that I sent to the cabinet, and it's a video of a wedding gathering, a secret quote quote gathering
Yep.
up in New York. There's over 7,000 people at this wedding. Now, mind you, in the video, it doesn't appear like there's 7,000. Maybe what? Maybe 2,000 in the video,
Well, one of
but
the plaintiff's
still,
arguments is they're actually following all the guidelines, right? They're
right.
they're they're doing the 6 feet if no mask, and they're probably bending the rules here and there, like almost every business is, but they're making an obvious and concerted effort to try and follow the rules, but they're saying, hey, look, we still need to have these gatherings. But clearly, 7,000 people in one place is probably not quite following the rules.
Right. I mean, and being completely honest with
These
that
traditions are
video,
thousands of years old.
right? That video, they're shoulder to shoulder, all the men as they're chanting, as that wedding
Yeah, no
commences.
masks.
No mask, no.
Yeah,
I mean that's a very special location and
yeah.
obviously a very special
But
ceremony.
every participant here is this is going to come down to like where the fist crosses the plane of somebody's nose. Like, if
Hmm.
these people expose themselves more, are they putting society at large at a greater risk? Is there a tragedy of the commons that can be pointed to?
Hmm.
Maybe. It's going to get interesting because they have a right to put themselves at risk.
Exactly,
Um,
and that's the thing though is that obviously there are two groups of people right now. There are those who feel the way as you just described. If they have the right to do that, if they so desire, you shall not tell me what to do. But then in
yeah,
the same instance, you have the other group that says, "Oh, by you doing that, you endanger me. You endanger society."
and I think that's going to be. I know some people feel like that's statistically and scientifically proven, but I feel like that's going to be harder to prove in the court of law. Um, we'll see. So anyway, but it's really hard to prove if you want to also keep the liquor stores open, and that's what Cuomo's run into.
Hmm.
Um, in a call with reporters Thursday, Cuomo said the High Court's ruling would have no impact on the state's virus control efforts because the red zone status for the area in question had expired last week. Okay, so basically he's saying, well, it's not technically a red zone right now, so they don't have standing.
Haha.
They don't have a complaint.
God.
Yeah, but the question is not whether or not this is causing suffering for them. I mean, it is, but it's also whether or not it could. Right, right. The
Right.
idea is like, how broad are your powers, sir?
Right.
It's
Right.
irrelevant from any practical impact because the zone we're talking about has already been moot, Governor said. I think it was really just an opportunity for the court to express its philosophy and politics. Well, it was that.
So
Um, the
I
court
don't want
does
to.
so often.
Yeah, this is the part that really got me about this article that it got me looking at, or at least one of the things. The Supreme Court can make its rulings. How? I mean, they can't enforce the law, as we know. That's the executive branch's job.
Right.
But how? How can these technical legislatures? Well, no, he's an executive. But how do you stop these individuals from ignoring the ruling of the Supreme Court? How does that get done? I mean, obviously,
Well,
the
there's
federal
a
government
there's
has
a
to do something.
natural law that comes into play then,
Right.
and it's not pretty.
No.
So
No.
if you are an executive running around and saying I am the law, um, the citizenry may not agree with you.
Well, only if yes, that's true, but it's only if the citizenry, disagrees.
Well,
Um,
what I'm saying is, like, if you're the executive and you make this rule and the Supreme Court upholds it, the citizenry is going to be like, okay, well, the Supreme Court upheld it. We'll fight the next battle. If you're an executive and you make this ruling and the Supreme Court strikes it down, and then you try to enforce it anyway, you see what I'm saying? There's a people will feel as though the rules of the game have been breached.
right,
And you
but that's
put yourself
only
and the country in a very dangerous position when you start doing that.
but that's only if you respect the ruling of the Supreme Court, or if you give it any weight.
What
There
I'm
are people
saying
that
is,
do not
if the
respect it.
executive is not giving it any weight, why should the citizen give the executive's laws any weight?
Because they probably respect the executive more than they respect the Supreme Court. I,
Ooh,
I,
I,
I don't like
I
that.
respect the executive and the authority
Right,
of the executive, but an
right,
executive who is actively disobeying a ruling of the Supreme Court, I think, is demonstrating a hypocrisy
right.
that makes that executive harder to respect.
Oh, I am completely in your corner on this one, but I'm saying there are more and more people out there that are going to be looking at the Supreme Court more and more and saying, I don't care what they say.
Phew, that's a new one in U.S. history.
And that's, well, that's something. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's something I'm looking at and I'm seeing, but and I don't want to just point this immediately at the left, but for some reason I'm starting to see this weird trend occur where I'm noticing people looking at the Supreme Court and they're looking at their executives, state wise, and they're like, oh well, I'm going to go with Como. I'm going to go with my person over what the Supreme Court says because they're really just an extension of politics anyway. But
I
not all,
mean, I don't
not
know. That's
all.
that's sort of a Confederate philosophy that we stamped out in 1865. I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll move forward with this article a bit, and I'll keep that in the back of my mind. We'll get to
Yes.
your question, I think. The Houses of Worship argued that the limits imposed by the state violated religious freedoms. Right, protected right to peaceably gather, right to practice religion, right to speech. All those things are First Amendment rights. Negative rights, pretty much, because it's not like it's a right to have the government do things for you. It's a right to do things in the absence of the government's action. Um, the Orthodox congregations. So Agadoth Israel is a nonprofit political organization of agglomerated Jewish groups, right? So
Hmm.
Orthodox Jewish groups seek to collectively file suit under Agadoth Israel.
Hmm.
So I guess as the NRA is to gun owners, Agadoth Israel is to Orthodox Jews. Maybe not every single Orthodox Jew uh, is all for everything this nonprofit group does, but in this
Hmm.
case, it is representing their cause as a whole.
Right.
Um, a federal judge in Brooklyn rejected separate requests made by the religious groups, and then this went up to the Second Circuit. And the Second Circuit declined emergency requests filed by both sets of challengers. Basically, it declined injunctive relief.
Hmm.
Uh, in two previous cases this year, the court in 5-4 votes turned away similar requests. That was the pre-ACB court. That was the Roberts siding with Sotomayor and the like, and Breyer. Um, those votes occurred before the death of Ginsburg, right? And
Right.
saw the other three liberal members joining with Roberts. Yeah, of course. Um, Cuomo urged New Yorkers to, quote, mask up in a tweet on Thursday, adding that nearly 7,000 people in the state had tested positive the day before, while 67 had died as a result of the virus. Um, very typical death
Hmm.
ranges. Okay. So that's Cuomo. Here's the fun part. The court issues the injunctive relief. It basically says um, the 10 and 25 person occupancy limits on the applicant penned disposition of the appeal and disposition of the petition for writ of cert if such writ is timely sought. Should the petition for a writ of cert be denied, this court shall terminate. This order shall terminate automatically. So they wrote the decision in such a way as to deal with Cuomo's criticisms. They said, "Hey, look, if this becomes irrelevant, then it's irrelevant."
Right.
Okay. So getting to the bottom of the actual order, you have for these reasons, we hold that enforcement of the governor's severe restrictions on the applicant's religious services must be enjoined. In other words, put a hold on that until the courts figure out whether or not that was constitutionally legitimate.
Hmm.
It's not a ruling on whether or not it was, but it's a suggestion that the Supreme Court thinks that the plaintiffs have a case. Okay, so then you have Gorsuch opinion and Roberts' dissent. I'm going to read Roberts' dissent first because I want to just understand his kooky logic. No, it's Kavanaugh concurring. Hold on. Roberts' dissent. Roberts says, I would not grant injunctive relief under the present circumstance. There is simply no need to do so. After the diocese and Agadah Israel filed for their applications, of course the Roman Catholic Church also filing,
Mm-hmm.
the governor revised the designations of the affected areas. None of the houses of worship identified in the applications is now subject to any fixed numerical restrictions. At these locations, the applicants can hold services with up to 50% capacity, which is at least as favorable as the relief they currently seek. Basically saying, no, those zones are yellow now. So, they're not orange or red zones, and there's no cause for complaint. He then says, numerical capacity of limits of 10 and 25 people respectively, depending on the applicable zone, do seem unduly restrictive, and it may well be that such restrictions do violate the free exercise clause. It is not necessary, however, for us to rule on that serious and difficult question at this time. You'll notice Roberts almost never wants to rule on any serious or difficult question. He would prefer the status quo and the appearance that the court is not important. Perhaps for the reasons you cite, that he doesn't want the court to be thought of as an instrument for societal change.
Mm-hmm.
The governor might reinstate the restrictions, but he also might not. And it is a significant matter to override determinations made by public health officials concerning what is necessary for public safety in the midst of a deadly pandemic. I don't know what constitutes a deadly, is the cold a deadly pandemic? Is any other flu a deadly pandemic? Or is only this one the deadly one? All right. If the governor does reinstate the numerical restrictions of the applicants can then turn to this court, and we could act quickly on their renewed applications. As things now stand, however, the applicants have not demonstrated their entitlement for the extraordinary remedy of injunction. He considers that extraordinary. He then cites some cases, as they all do.
Mm-hmm.
And here's his conclusion, because I'm not going to get into the case law. I'm not a lawyer. Some other folks could look into those cases. It is not clear which part of this loan quotation today's concurrence finds so discomfiting. All right, so let me look at this quote. Hold on. Get him in context. One solo concurrence today takes aim at my concurring opinion in South Bay, a 3-6 opinion. Today's concurrence views that opinion with disfavor because, to justify its result, it reached back 100 years in the U.S. reports to grab hold of our decision in Jacobson versus Massachusetts, 1905. Today's concurrence notes that Jacobson was the first case South Bay cited on the substantive legal question before the court. It was the only case cited involving a pandemic. And it suggests that in the wake of South Bay, some have mistaken this court's modest decision in Jacobson for a towering authority that overshadows the Constitution during a pandemic. But while Jacobson occupies 3 pages of today's concurrence, it warranted exactly one sentence in South Bay. What did that one sentence say? Only that our Constitution principally entrusts the safety and health of the people to politically accountable officials of the states to guard and protect. It is not clear which part of this loan quotation today's concurrence finds so discomfiting. The concurrence speculates that there is so much more to the sentence than meets the eye, invoking, among other interpretive tools, the new first case cited rule. Okay, so a little tongue-in-cheek there from Gorsuch, or from Roberts.
Yeah.
But the actual proposition asserted should be uncontroversial, and the concurrence must reach beyond the words themselves to find the target it is looking for. By the way, if you're watching this, I recommend you go find this and read it yourself. Trusting me to read it to you is no good, but I will try and get the gist of it out. So here's Gorsuch, and I think he is one of the sharper libertarian-leaning minds on the bench. He is concerned with individual rights, I think, more than the others, on average. Gorsuch. Government is not free to disregard the First Amendment in times of crisis. At a minimum, that amendment prohibits government officials from treating religious exercise worse than comparable secular activities unless they are pursuing a compelling interest and using at least restrictive, the least restrictive means available. Yet recently, during the COVID pandemic, certain states seem to have ignored these long-settled principles, and he has a citation there. Today's case supplies just the latest example. New York's governor has asserted the power to assign different color codes to different parts of the state and govern each by executive decree. In, quote, red zones, houses of worship are all but closed, limited to a maximum of 10 people. In the Orthodox Jewish community, that limit might operate to exclude all women, considering 10 men are necessary to even establish a religious service, essentially what they call a quorum, which is interesting since that's a very legal word. In orange zones, it is not much different. Churches and synagogues are limited to a maximum of 25 people. These restrictions apply to even the largest cathedrals and synagogues, which ordinarily hold hundreds. And the restrictions apply no matter the precaution taken, including social distancing, wearing masks, leaving doors and windows open, foregoing singing, and disinfecting spaces between services, as all the small businesses are sort of doing all these things, right? Schools are doing all these things. At the same time, the governor has chosen to impose no capacity restrictions on certain businesses he considers, quote, essential. And I think this is where Gorsuch has a stronger case. And it's something that I didn't notice Roberts take up, although to be fair to Roberts, I didn't read every word. But my question is, hey, if a school can be open with hundreds of people in it, and it's doing all these things, and a church is also doing all these things, why is the church closed and the school open? It turns out that businesses the governor considers essential include, quote, hardware stores, acupuncturists, and liquor stores. Bicycle repair shops, certain signage companies, accountants, lawyers, and insurance agents are all, quote, essential too. So at least according to the governor, it may be unsafe to go to church, but it is always fine to pick up another bottle of wine, shop for a new bike, or spend the afternoon exploring your distal points and meridians. Who knew public health would so perfectly align with secular convenience? As almost everyone on the court today recognizes, squaring the governor's edicts with the traditional First Amendment rules is no easy task. People may gather inside for extended periods in bus stations and airports, in laundromats and banks, in hardware stores or liquor shops. No apparent reason exists why people may not gather, subject to identical restrictions, in churches or synagogues, especially when religious institutions have made plain that they stand ready, able, and willing to follow all the safety precautions required of essential businesses and perhaps more besides. The only explanation for treating religious places differently seems to be a judgment that what happens there is not as essential as what happens in secular spaces. Indeed, the governor is remarkably frank about this. In his judgment, laundry and liquor, travel and tools are all, quote, essential, while traditional religious exercises are not. That is exactly the kind of discrimination the First Amendment forbids. So, Gorsuch goes on. But that's quite a difference of opinion between he and Roberts.
Right, and it's a protection of civil liberties, for the individual. I mean, that's something that Gorsuch has championed already, as we've noticed in a multitude of his decisions.
Right. I mean, he's just pointing out these color codes can change at any time. And he points out, by the way, he also says at some point in here, these services, Orthodox Jewish services, are sometimes conducted. They're open daily for anybody to come in at any time. The Roman Catholic Church has multiple services throughout the week. It's not just like one Sunday each week that's being shut down. And so if the color code changes, it might be several services that are shut down before you get your next injunctive relief. That is, Roberts agrees to look at it again. Right.
But that's obviously just prolonging the process rather than making an official decision that can continually be used later on.
Right. But the idea is like, Roberts was saying, hey, look, there's no current limit. None of these zones are presently orange or red, so come back to us when they are. And Gorsuch is saying, yeah, but when they are, it'll be probably several religious services that get canceled before you offer them injunctive relief.
Right.
If we didn't offer it now, so
So I mean, obviously these religious groups need to. I mean, if they're going to go after again, then they should sue again and be very specific with their wording. For the continued process of the pandemic, maybe that will work in their favor. But obviously, the defense used that against them here, saying, "Oh, just for this particular instance at this particular time, we don't need to worry about it anymore."
right, right.
Mm,
So we've got some spicy stuff today. Religion and the Middle East, right?
right.
So
Well,
do you want to go ahead and read the covert Israeli-Saudi meeting from Reuters?
I do, but I have the question
Oh,
for
yeah,
you.
that's totally fair.
Yeah.
Question
Sure.
time.
Yeah. Question time. All right. So, if shutdown orders start to roll in from a variety of states, can we expect to see the Supreme Court get more involved in its decision making? Will the court's decisions start being targeted as political?
All of the court's decisions are targeted as the court's decisions are already being targeted as political. So, um, but I would say yes. I would expect the court to take up more of these decisions this year.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure if they're going to take up masks in certain regards in public spaces and things like that, but I think they will take up further lockdowns of businesses.
Yeah.
So, question is, will the court take up more
Go.
COVID cases
We have
or
this.
COVID or lockdown cases, I guess?
Here you go. I just sent it to you.
Okay, yeah. Uh,
And I mean, you're right. Obviously, the court's decisions have been targeted as political for how long now? And I think that's what worries me is that people are starting to see it as that. Again, um, they're not supposed to be, but they are. They shouldn't be, but to some degree they are. And it's a little nerve wracking noticing there's numbers of people who are starting to look at it like, oh well, it's just an extension of the politics in the system. And in a way it is, but in a way it's not supposed to be. The balance of power.
all right, so my answer is that yes, and the court is already perceived as political.
And I'm going to say yes, and you're going to see a push even more so as it being political. Um, I mean, I think
I mean,
especially.
so
Go
what's
ahead. I'm
really
sorry.
strange is like conservatives, social conservatives, have weathered for, I don't know, like 40 years at least, Supreme Court decisions that they felt were wrong or felt were unconstitutional or were targeting them.
Hmm.
Um, they didn't start burning the court in effigy. They sought to get justices that they liked more. They created the Federalist Society and things like this. But I don't see that, when the court doesn't rule your way, that's just part of the game. That's how people have perceived it for probably for 100 years.
Right.
There was, well, okay. So you have the Confederacy responding to a Supreme Court decision very negatively, right? And we had a war over
Yes.
that.
Yes.
But ever since then, Supreme Court decisions are just sort of taken in stride, and you pick up the pieces and go back with another legal challenge a different way. So
Right.
why does that change now?
So again, I think that this is you're not going to see anything from this for a while. I feel, and it's not the political game that is at play. That's going to continue on as it is. What I'm saying, or at least what I think I'm seeing, and take what I say with a grain of salt, and is simply an opinion. I'm seeing lots of younger people and middle-aged individuals, and their perceptions on the Supreme Court are slowly becoming, or they're deteriorating.
Well,
Um,
they're
oh,
deteriorating because it's no longer ruling the way they would prefer.
um, I think that because the Supreme Court has been more in the limelight. Now, maybe this is just
Well,
a
I mean,
brief
like,
thing.
so what's limelight for you? Like for me, Heller, Obergefell. I mean, heck,
You,
Roe.
yes, but Cabinet, yeah. If you want to go that far,
I
yes.
do. I mean, that's not that long ago.
No, it's not. But we're reaching a point. where those decisions held a lot of weight and there was respect behind those decisions, whether you agreed with them or didn't. And the game was played to mix and meld and change and alter
I
and
think that
review.
some people felt very, very differently about it. Probably about half the country on each of those decisions felt that the decision was very wrong.
Right.
But that's
That's the game. That's
so. What's different now compared to those decisions, where half the country will feel the decision is very, very wrong, and what?
I can't put my finger on it. Just there's something going on with younger individuals, and I'm saying people like under their 40s, generally where there's this extra level of dissent towards decisions because they're looking at the Supreme Court in a more political sense. You have to understand, there's a lot of people that don't even see that game being played, right? I mean, how, so how many people are out there that look at the Supreme Court like, oh, yes, they're a non-biased group, and how many people have we individually run into who explain, well, look at the politics that go on inside this group. Really, that happens? And legitimately, obviously, you and I are like, yes, that occurs, but to some people, they don't see that. They don't see the amount of games being played. And when that comes to the light, when that comes to their views, they're like, "Wow, I didn't realize it was that bad."
Okay, so like you think that for a lot of people they're suddenly becoming aware that the Supreme Court is a thing which can the decisions of which can have a direct impact on their lives.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I probably agree with that. Somebody gave me some very depressing information recently. It was like, you know, it was like less than half the population goes to movies, and less than half of those people, or no, it was like less than half. Yeah, it's like slightly more than half the population watches sitcoms on TV or soap operas,
Hmm.
and it's like less than half of those go to movies, less than half of those read books, less than half of those experience uh, opera or plays.
Hmm.
So you're right. There's probably huge sectors of the population that I, as my elitist coastal self, never interact with.
Um, and I guess one of the things, maybe the reason I saw this, come up from the depths, I guess you could say, is how many more people have become political during this last election? How much interest has been sparked, whether you like Donald Trump or you don't, or Joe Biden or you don't? There has been an obvious rise in political interest in the last 4 years, right? And how many of those individuals, how many of those people have read what they read, seen what they've seen, and truly know how the game is played in every aspect?
Yeah. I
Not
mean,
many.
I don't like to imagine that I know how the game is played in every aspect, but you're right.
Yeah.
Probably you are dead on. The court will be entering the limelight over the next couple of years, particularly
And
with
yeah,
the split government we're about to
yep.
enter into.
And that's what worries me. Is that
Well,
that
clearly it's what
yeah.
worries Roberts. Clearly that's
Right.
his highest priority.
Yeah, get away from me. But he's not going to have a choice because the Republicans are going to be using the Supreme Court. They're going to weaponize it to some degree because it's one of the only tools they're going to have.
Well, I mean, the Republicans, to be fair to the Republicans, they have observed the court weaponized as they
Yep.
perceive it for decades.
Yep.
These intellectual Republicans,
Right.
people like Neil Bork, have watched the court be weaponized and said, "Okay, is that the game? Then we're going
Right.
to play that game."
Right. But back then it was status quo. It was part of the norm. It wasn't such a big deal. You went on your day and didn't really realize it. Now after the age of well, I'm not going to say after the age of Trump because he's still there like a shark under the water.
I
But
mean, again, like for the conservative intellectuals, I mean, they watched the ACA decision where Roberts said, "Yeah, Obamacare is not a tax, but it is when I need it to be."
die.
It's not just Trump, right?
It shouldn't be, but it's
It will be perceived to be
yes, it will.
by that segment of the population. You're probably right.
I, just the massive articles that have popped up on my feed right now about the age of Trumpism. How do we stop Trumpism? Like it's like, oh my God.
I mean, I don't know. That's apparently he has carved out headspace. He's carved out living space in these people's heads, and will hold it for decades.
Right, right. So, you get what I'm thinking,
Okay.
obviously. All right, so we'll move on here.
Sorry. Your turn. Analysis: covert Saudi-Israeli meeting sends Biden a strong message on Iran. This is a Reuters report.
Right. So a staff article here, and this is the one that Cabinet chose, and then we switched the last second. So let me read on here. And Saudi Arabia is always an interesting player in the Middle East game, and now that we have become fairly energy independent away from the Middle East, they have had to kind of change their role to some degree, but they're still obviously fighting there. There's still all sorts of politicking going on. So let me get started here. All right, so a historic meeting between Israel's prime minister and Saudi Arabia's crown prince has sent a strong signal to allies and enemies alike that the two countries remain deeply committed to containing their common foe, Iran. For those of you who don't know, Iran and Saudi Arabia are two massive players in the region who will try to upend each other at every turn in every way. The classic Sunni Shia Muslim split that occurs between them. Last Sunday's covert meeting in the Saudi city of Neom, confirmed by Israeli officials but publicly denied by Riyadh, conveyed a coordinated message to U.S. President-elect Joe Biden that Washington's main allies in the region are closing ranks. They are probably concerned at what's happening. It was the first publicly confirmed visit to Saudi Arabia by Israel's leader and a meeting that was unthinkable until recently, as the two countries do not have formal diplomatic relations. But it underlines the depth of the two countries' concern about Iran and shows how opposition to Tehran is bringing about a strategic realignment of countries in the Middle East. Okay, so Saudi Arabia and Israel have been American allies for a long time, and they kind of just stared at one another and could publicly say they didn't like each other, but they've always been to some degree aligned, especially when it deals with Iran in the region, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, right? Israel's neighbors and relations with its neighbors are complicated and have been since 1948 or whatever. But
Right.
certainly since 1990, they've grown closer. Partly because of a mutual existential threat in Iraq
Mm-hmm.
with Saddam, and the United States sort of getting very involved there in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know, the Bush years are complicated because of Afghanistan and Iraq and the perceptions around Iraq and how the Saudi people see things versus how the Saudi leadership see things. Israel was just trying to stay as quiet as possible during that time because they didn't want to get embroiled in the U.S.'s mess, sort
Mm-hmm.
of, because they're an easy punching bag for their neighbors. Like if Israel's involved, then the neighbors of Israel can point and say, look, the U.S. is actually in bed with the enemy of Islam.
Which has been, yeah, the concept's been happening forever at
But
this point.
I don't know, like, and then Saudi Arabia is sort of the source of some of the extreme Wahhabism. But at the same time, again, the leadership is more Machiavellian at the least, sort of more pragmatic in the way it looks at the world.
More modern.
Yeah, but meanwhile, they don't want their people to be that modern, right? Because
Well, it's it's that's the counterbalance. Is I have to appear to still be extremely old school conservative. Meanwhile, I live in a giant penthouse atop a 150-story tall building.
Well,
Right?
otherwise, if I embrace these Western ideas, maybe it comes with Marxism, right? And maybe I get what the Shah got. Right,
Right,
right. I mean
right.
that's how they look at Iran. It's like there's a failed state where the leadership screwed up, gave the people too much knowledge and freedom and information, and the people turned around and ate the rich, as it were.
Yes, yes. I mean, they clearly have seen that, but they have been ruling, we'll say, with an iron scimitar. So they're really not letting go of their power. But they it's a delicate game that has to be played. And speaking of Mohammed bin Salman, let me read up to him because he's such an interesting character. It's Iran, Israeli cabinet minister. Oh boy, I'm going to butcher this one. Tazachi Gabi told Israel's army radio when asked about the visit, quote, it is very, very important to create an axis which isolates Iran. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the kingdom's de facto ruler, and Israel Prime Ministers Benjamin Netanyahu both enjoyed strong support from U.S. President Donald Trump and championed the maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Yeah, you want to keep your eyes on Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah.
He is a de facto ruler. He's only the crown prince, the current leader, technically, of Saudi Arabia is not considered to be all mentally there. And Salman sort of took over a few years ago and has been playing this game tremendously well since. He has been trying to refashion Saudi Arabia as a regional power, which I mean has always been happening, but the way in which he's doing it is difficult because you have the United States that's sort of taking its foot out of the region a little bit when it comes to energy dependence. China wants to step in to some degree, but he still wants to play both sides of the ball because he has to, because he's still allies with the United States. But the country is doing an economic restructuring. And it's a really fascinating game. They also, what is it, Aramco. Aramco, within the
Hmm.
next few years, is going to go public on the stock market. And that obviously that is all Mohammed bin Salman's doing when it comes to still trying to bring money into this giant of a company that what is it? Aramco is worth 5 times as much as the top five tech was it the top five most wealthy companies in the world combined. I mean, that's what it was. I was looking at that last year, so that may have changed, but I seriously doubt it has changed much. So that just shows you the breadth and the width of this company. So let's go on here. They fear Biden will adopt policies on Iran similar to those adopted during the Barack Obama U.S. presidency, which strained Washington's ties with its traditional regional allies. Biden has said it will rejoin the International Nuclear Pact of Iran that Trump quit in 2018 and work with allies to strengthen its terms if Tehran first resumes strict compliance. I don't know. Both Israel and Saudi Arabia have recently ramped up rhetoric against Iran, which is locked in several proxy wars with Riyadh in the region. So the crown prince is basically trying to show Biden and the United States, hey, we are really dedicated to making sure Iran does not mess things up. Obviously, that they're fighting in all these other countries still. I mean, you have uh, parts of Iran's militants um, in all sorts of places, not only in Africa. I mean, you have them in, let's see here. Why am I? Oh, Tunisia. I mean, they were in Tunisia. They're in Libya. Um, they're hanging out kind of in the scenes. I mean, all over Syria. I mean, Syria's been in a civil war now for what? How many years? Nearly 9 years at this point, and that is just another huge mess in itself. But also, even right across the way from Saudi Arabia, you also have them involved in where is it? Oman. They're involved a little bit in Oman,
Yeah. Well, I mean the stuff going on between
Yemen.
Yemen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean
I
the
mean,
Saudis have some reach. You can't ignore the Turks in all this.
nope.
You
The
can't
Turks, the
ignore
Turks have been quiet.
Russia.
It is the
The
playing
Egyptians have
field.
games to play. They don't have as much reach as the Turks have, but they have games to play as well.
They've been real quiet lately.
Yeah,
But you're right, and
it
that is
doesn't
the
mean
Middle
they're not
Eastern
acting. You know.
right,
Yeah.
and that is the Middle Eastern game. It's I remember showing a number of people a board I made with all sorts of weird connections because you have Iran and Saudi Arabia that are big players, but then you also have Turkey and Egypt who are big players, and above them you have the United States and Russia, and now China's poking in,
Yep.
and then you have the smaller countries that are sort of want to be independent but can't not be independent. It's a mess. Um, Moving on here. Iran has built a network of armed Shia militants across the Arab world, which we just talked about, from Iraq to Syria and Lebanon down into the Gulf of Yemen. Tehran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen attacked Saudi oil installations last week, the latest in a string of attacks on Saudi targets. Israel is waging a shadow war against Iranian forces, mostly through regular air raids in Syria, on Lebanese Shia paramilitary group Hezbollah, on Iran's Revolutionary Guard, and on supplies of weapons as they move across the country. Now, Saudi king not informed. Sunday's meeting was held in the presence of U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Israel's spy chief, Israeli media said. Pompeo, who has been trying to coax Saudi Arabia to follow the lead of the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan in normalizing ties with Israel, declined to confirm the meeting. But diplomats in the region said U.S. envoys had privately confirmed the meeting took place. Netanyahu declined to comment on the meeting. He has yet to visit the UAE and Bahrain since formal ties were established with a tacit approval from Gulf powerhouse Saudi Arabia. On Thursday, he said he expected more countries to normalize ties with Israel in the next few months. There was limited talk of the meeting on Saudi social media, but some opposition figures denounced the visit. Political analysis said Saudi denial of the meeting could have been a way to test the waters at home. Um, and that phrase right there is spot on. I mean, these writers know what they're talking about because that is what Salman has been slowly poking about quietly and making things happen. Because in Saudi Arabia, just as you and I were mentioning, there's obviously this very hardcore conservative leaning group, but in the same instance, Salman has slowly been getting rid of dissenters, and when I mean getting rid of, like he has had obviously a few people removed. He has isolated a number of individuals to house arrest permanently to make sure that they are not kind of out there saying things they shouldn't be saying. And he has really taken control of the country over top of the king because he's had to because he's not all there. Um,
Right.
so doing this and I mean, again, this would have never happened how many years ago? Never in a million years. This would be a breakthrough. But he's been
So
doing.
according to the Wall Street Journal this morning, this breakthrough did not occur. In fact, there was a meeting between the Saudis and Israelis that ended badly, and nobody could agree on anything, and they went home, and they will not be normalizing relations.
Yeah, okay. I seriously doubt that. This was not a deal. This was just a meeting. This was just, hey, let's get our stuff together because
So my question
things are going
is,
to change.
I guess I'm ready to ask a question. It's my turn, right?
Sure,
All
sure.
right.
Yes, it is.
So my question is, and I know we got through like half this article, but I think that's the meat of it.
Yeah.
Um, does will Israel and Saudi Arabia normalize relations this year, or will they work together without doing so, or will their relationship get worse and worse as the Trump presidency comes to a close and a Biden administration wants to go back to the way things were?
Um. So again, when you say this year, I'm going to say 2021 because wait. Right. It is going to be. See, it's funny you stopped me at the moment I did because another sentence or two down. Um, I mean, it's talking about the king, how he had no idea that these things were happening. Because they're kind of waiting for him to be done, right? So when King Solomon is still alive, but his health is bad. I'm going to say it completely depends upon the health of King Solomon, right? So when he passes, and the younger Muhammad is the new king of Saudi Arabia, you're going to see, I'm going to quote this, quote, normalization is a carrot to get Biden's focus away from other issues, especially Saudi human rights.
Interesting. But don't you think that will be? Don't you think Biden will prefer? Like he's going to push like LGBT stuff in the Middle East, and he won't care about Israeli peace.
I think he's going to want. I think he's going to want Israeli peace more than he's going to want that. I mean, he may push that, especially when there's going to be people saying things, but he's going to be quiet on it. He's probably going to want to have on his record, look, I normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And mind you, that is very little of his doing. It's just timing, but it's something that Solomon can sit there and say, yes, look what I've done. I've done this, and now we can move on into the future. But he won't take any steps until his father has passed away.
So you were saying that that it depends on the health of King Solomon. So if King Solomon croaks, then Israel and Saudi Arabia will normalize, but regardless, they're going to grow closer together, right?
Quietly.
Okay. My prediction is no.
Okay.
They will be further divided with a with a with a Democrat United States leadership.
Now, okay, what is your reasoning for
that? My reasoning is that oh man, I've got so many cynical reasons for it, right? Like one of them is that Biden's not actually the one calling the shots of his presidency. It's people who are much more active and younger than he, and those people benefit from problems in the Middle East. They don't benefit from things being solved. So I think those people actually want to stir up resentment and bitter feuds and distrust between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and they want to fuel off the Palestinian crisis indefinitely.
Right.
Because that's how they make their political hay.
Right.
So I'm saying no, Saudi Arabia and Israel will be further divided in 2021.
So, and it's funny because you're saying that with Biden, that's the reason, the Democratic leader. I think that's exactly at this current juncture, that's the exact reason they're going to come more together. But it's going to be done quietly. And it also depends on, how long Netanyahu stays in office. Because he's been one to kind of spread his wings a little bit more, to kind of open his arms to more discussions compared to a number of leaders in Israel. Right. Especially the pressure he's getting there domestically. As one of his rivals was saying that having this meeting is foolish, or what was he quoted in saying?
Yeah, Benny Gantz, who is the co-leader of Israel, sort of, kind of, because they're currently on a coalition government.
Yeah, the defense minister. I mean,
what was the defense minister? Okay.
Well, he's the political rival and defense minister.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, he's who is due to take over as prime minister a year from now under a power sharing agreement.
Yeah, that's because Netanyahu didn't have a majority. He won with a plurality.
Right. But that makes things in Israel still very, very difficult. But it
for
forces
people complaining about a two-party system, look at places that don't have one.
Right. That's true. It's a bit of a mess there too. But he's Netanyahu is setting up Gantz to, I don't say to fail, but to basically, oh look, relations between us and the Saudis were decent, And when this guy steps in, they're going to get worse unless he follows the pattern that I'm setting.
Well, you may well be right. I'm going to have a hard time proving you wrong because your claims are that there will be secret backroom deals that cannot be easily observed.
And that's right,
You
but
hedging monster.
I am. But at the same instance, that's the game that's being played. Because look what Salman's doing. Also in the same instance, there was no meeting, because they said, there was no meeting between us. We didn't have a meeting, but everyone knows they did, because that is what the Saudis do. They say they do something, or excuse me, they say they don't do something, but they do it in front of everybody's eyes. It's they do it on purpose because they want you to see who the real power in the room is. That's the funny thing about the Saudis. And for the longest time, no one could tell them otherwise, because you could not ignore all the oil and the strategic location of where they were. But now, with the U.S., I don't want to say stepping out, but no longer having to rely on Saudi Arabia in that way. But then you have China and Russia still poking around. They're still involved, the Saudis, that is, but they have to find a different way to strengthen their position. And that's now looking more domestically.
Yeah, could well be. Well, we're headed to the end of our segment here. Is there anything else you want to say about SCOTUS or the Saudis or Israel?
This is the long game. I mean, we may never find out these answers, just like you said, but it's going to be.
Well, that's why I'm putting time limits on the questions, right? In 2021, will these countries normalize relations? I'm not asking questions that are grayer than that.
It's yes if King
Solomon
passes away.
Okay.
I think you're going to see something.
Although and there will be secret backroom deals regardless, right? That's your hedge? Okay.
I mean, when has that ever stopped? The secret backroom deals in the Middle East.
Right.
Yes.
But which draw them closer together, militarily, economically. That's what you're saying. I'm saying, no, they will be further divided in 2021 by weak U.S. leadership and by the actions of other actors that prefer to see them divided, like the Turks.
Yeah, that's Turks got their own problems with Syria right now.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they can't afford to reach out and
poke a little bit,
and cause some inconvenient incidents or provoke some inconvenient incidents.
The game in the Middle East is always the game in the Middle East.
Yep. All right, so we're up to our Enchiridion, a little bit of culture today. By the way, I haven't asked you. Have you seen The Queen's Gambit on Netflix?
I've seen it. It keeps catching my eye, but I just have not had the opportunity to check it out yet.
The chess is good. The social justice is super woke. I mean, it's like it can't
get out of its own way.
The quality of the production is very high. Like they got the period, like the clothing, all the things that Hollywood can do well. They did well.
Right.
But they just it never hesitates to take a cheap shot at the nuclear family, at Western civilization in general, at capitalism, at all men are weak and lecherous, and I mean it's just and you can sleep around and do whatever you like, and eventually that will earn you the power of friendship from a bunch of not quite so jilted lovers, and they'll help you win a chess game. But the chess is good.
But the chess is excellent.
And you know what? The idea of putting a pretty girl in the 1960s playing chess instead of some pasty white nerdy guy, that's just good television, right? It's easier on the eyes. But
of course,
it's not. Don't go looking for some philosophical depth. You'll be sorely disappointed.
I can't tell you the number of shows that I had to endure with my wife watching. I mean, just to explain, like the CW, the everything in every show, there are constant pokes at just conservatism, family values and norms.
Well,
in
that's
so
fine.
many
Like
ways.
Hollywood always did this. You can find it in the Goonies if you go looking for it.
Right, but it's so blatant that a liberal-minded individual, my wife, is like, can they please stop? It's just there for the sake of being there.
This is the difference, right? This is the difference between what Spielberg did with the Goonies in the 80s is he made a great film with a good story and compelling characters, and the characters happened to be a little more sympathetic from the left point of view.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think there's a problem with that. I think that's just great storytelling, and you have your point of view, and you're telling the story from your point of view, but you're telling a great story. What they're
Right.
doing now, and I think the reason it's not working, or that is to say, it's more evident, is they're putting the cart before the horse, and they want to have their message be up front,
Yep.
and then they try to cobble the story together around it, and it doesn't work the same.
Oh, just go look for the trailer of the Batwoman series from the CW.
Oh
Uh,
no, I just avoided that altogether. I think I
uh,
remember seeing the trailer at the time.
oh no, please do, please do,
Yeah.
please just go watch the trailer. And it's if you want to say the cart before the horse, it's not even the cart. It's a cart, it's a train, it's a boat that's run aground before the horse. It's
Yeah.
everything.
And it's just sad because these could be great stories. In fact,
Right.
maybe you sway my opinion on something. If
Right.
you can tell a great story and have me along for the ride, but man, I am out when you start preaching. I say I'm out. I watched the whole stupid series because I wanted to. The chess games were good, all right, but
Right. It's
um,
willing to always hear a different perspective and to watch something good in the process. But when you're not watching something good and stuff's being thrown in your face constantly without doing it in a understanding fashion, then you've lost me.
yeah. All right. So with that, we'll move on to the Enchiridion and end for the day. We're up to number 3. It's a short one today.
Yes.
Epictetus Enchiridion, which means handbook, basically. Number 3.
Mhm.
Uh, Worth remembering. This is a guy who was lame, uh, basically abused most of his life, and he's got a positive point of view. So I think that's worth paying attention to.
Mhm.
Number 3. With regard to whatever objects either delight the mind or contribute to the use, or are tenderly beloved, remind yourself of what nature they are, beginning with the merest trifles. If you have a favorite cup, that is but a cup of which you are fond of, for thus, if it is broken, you can bear it. If you embrace your child or your wife, that you embrace a mortal, and thus, if either of them dies, you can bear it. Some harsh words from Epictetus.
Ooh,
He's not
wow.
saying that your child or your wife is the same thing as a cup.
Right, right. But it's a I don't want to say hedging, but it's barricade yourself, be prepared.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
that is what he's saying is a
right.
cup can break, a
Mhm.
person can die, and these are things for which you have to be prepared.
The
Um,
harshness of reality.
yep. All right. We'll
All
end with
right.
that. You have a great week. See you next Chabinet meeting, Department
Indeed,
Chair.
indeed, you as well, Cabinet. I still do not have a gavel. I don't know. It will be what it is. Have a good one, and we'll see everyone who's watching, listening later.